What's good, family? It's your boy Big L again, man, with another forum blast, man. Uh, Tonight, I really wanted to talk to you guys about this current state of Black America, how we got into this position. The way to get out of this position is group economics. But in order to understand group economics, man, you have to be able to understand how we got here, the need to get out of this joint. See, blacks are in a real life monopoly game. And I first heard that analogy, that metaphor from Dr. Claude Anderson in his book, Black Labor, White Wealth. In the beginning chapter, the first chapter, he talks about how blacks are so economically behind everybody else, and the reasons why. Now, when you think of it, man, you got to think of this in a real open manner and go back in history and think for a second. When the men, women, and children were brought to this country from Africa, first off, they were people. Don't buy into the notion that they were slaves before they were people, or that they were never people. Slavery is often dehumanized and not placed in its proper context. These were men, women, and children who were brought to this country, okay? And when they were brought here to this country, they were used to build the power, wealth, and influence for their slave masters. They built this country. They built everything that was needed for this country to survive, okay? They weren't paid for it. They were slaves, okay? So when they were free, quote unquote, freed, they were kicked out of slavery. And I use kicked out intentionally, but when they were kicked out, they were on the outside in a world that they didn't know how to navigate without any resources whatsoever. No resources, family. Remember, they were producing and building for their slave masters. They didn't have any wealth of their own. They had no money of their own. So they were kicked out of slavery, freed, quote unquote, of slavery, from slavery, with no money, no place to go, nothing. They had their freedom, okay? So that's the point in time where white people really got angry and began to really hate black people, because their chief source of revenue, income, money was gone. So they would create all these laws, man, and put all these laws in place to make it difficult for blacks to be successful. But blacks began to thrive, man. You know, they found, created communities where they were forced, essentially, to depend on each other for success. So in those communities, man, they were prosperous, thriving, doing well. But the hatred from the white people at that time was so evil and vile that they began to do whatever they can to destroy those communities that black people had set up. Now, the importance of understanding the monopoly game. When you think of monopoly, okay, when you're playing monopoly, saying you're playing with three other people, okay, you watch these other people get their money in the beginning of the game. You know, you get that little stack of money in the beginning. Everybody gets their stack to start off with. start off with the same amount. Okay? You don't get no money. The other players get their money plus your money that you were supposed to get. And they're able to go around the board several times to continue to collect their $200 when they pass go, to buy up all the properties, to own everything, to create the laws, to do everything. Then you're allowed to hop in the game to begin playing. But when you're allowed in the game, you're still not allowed in the game. You didn't get any money to play. You don't own anything. So you going around the board one time, you land on somebody else's property. You have to figure out a way how you're going to pay them. But what's the way you're going to pay them if you have no money? That's where we get sharecropping. These blacks who were unable to financially take care of their families felt like that was a way for them to gain what they needed to be able to provide. So they would crop and farm particular land that the slave masters or their former slave masters owned. Okay? So that's what sharecropping. But these sharecroppers, man, you know, whenever they wanted to, they could, you know, say what the freed slaves were giving wasn't enough. They would take more. They would just do all these things to make it difficult for these freed slaves to be successful. It wasn't on some where they went to work and they punched the clock and there were all these laws in place to make sure it was fair and balanced. From there, that's where we see, from slavery, that's where we see the foundation of white supremacy. That's where we see how slaves, men, women, and children, built this country, the foundation of this country, but all the laws and all of the institutions that were put in place were to benefit the dominant white society. So when we hopped into this real life Monopoly game, white supremacy was in place for us to fail. So it set up this system that blacks had never recovered from ever. But when you think of the Black Wall Streets, because there were multiple, there were more than one, there were several, how prosperous we were, how well we were doing. We have to get back to creating power, wealth, and influence now. So how do we do that? For one, we begin to practice group economics, where we buy and sell black. It has to be a black first mentality in order to gain power, wealth, and influence. So now we got to have more black businesses, and not just any old black business. Okay, we don't want to fall into that trap, because every black business is not a good black business. You know, all money is not good money. We don't need no more liquor stores. We don't need things that are going to do damage to our people, even more damage than we already have. So now that's when we have to get a code of conduct, which we don't have, which we're lacking. We need to have a code where we are able to police ourselves like other cultures are able to do, like other cultures do so well at doing. But practicing group economics, and that's something that I'm going to be talking more about in future videos. But you got to understand, when it comes to blacks right now, our primary root issue, the problem, is white supremacy. Through white supremacy, we are economically disadvantaged. So all of our issues are based off or funneled through our lack of economics. All of our issues. So how do we fix these problems is what we're going to be discussing here in the future. But I need you to start thinking. We have to begin to support our own, create our own. If you can't find a black business to support, make one. Come up with one. Find other like-minded people But think about that. When slaves were freed, it would be like somebody who just uh, was unjustly and unfairly placed in prison for 50 years. All they know is prison. All they have is a prison mindset. And they get out of prison and they're delivered to the outside of the prison with nothing. Absolutely nothing. They have no skills, no education, no understanding of how the world works, no family, no friends, no resources, nothing. And this was the life of many of the quote unquote free slaves. Remember, they had no family. The family that they had were the people that they were in slavery with. Remember, families were intentionally broken and sold off, intentionally, to destroy that family dynamic. Okay? We have constantly, since day one, been economically disadvantaged. So we're always playing catch up financially. And we wonder why the wealth gap is so far between us and white folk. Why it's so, the gap is so far. But then you have these Negroes who have this mentality that since Oprah and Jay-Z and all these other Negroes is doing well, that all of black society is doing well. That mentality is foolish. Then you have these other folk who tell you, if you just do well, go to school, stay out of trouble, don't get nobody pregnant, keep your credit clean, and all these good things, that all of a sudden the scales are tipped in place, in a balanced place. Think about that. If you do all those things, you're still far behind. We entered the race of life already having been lapped 1,000 times. And we are trying to catch up. And our mentality, for many of us, is trying to catch up, is to assimilate, is to integrate, to unify. Or maybe if we do more like them, we will be better. One of the first things that blacks learned after their freedom was, without money, power, and influence, there was no freedom. There was no freedom. Family, right now, we wonder why so many blacks are selling out. Why they're selling their soul, why they're willing to sell their people out. Because they may not be able to articulate it, but they understand that power, wealth, and influence is essential for success. But these folk who are selling out, they're not getting no power, wealth, and influence, man. They're getting a little change, but they don't own nothing. Right now, black folks do not own anything. But if we come together, man, instead of this mindset where we're separate, if we come together and begin to build a strong, stable, viable economic infrastructure, we can change the doggone course of future generations, man, and deal a powerful blow to white supremacy. We gotta do it, man. I appreciate you guys for listening, but just think about the economic aspect when we're dealing with this. What our ancestors went through after they were quote unquote free. Think about that. Does that play a role in where we are today? Ask yourself that and begin to evaluate, am I supporting black businesses? Am I supporting black businesses? And let's begin to support them, family. I thank you for tuning in for another quick burst of the forum with your boy, Big L. Make sure you catch me every Wednesday night, man, at 9 p.m. on cvoiceradio.com, the forum. Check me out, man. I appreciate you guys talking to me and having this discussion, man. Make sure you hit me up, subscribe, and share this joint, man. And let's wake some people up. And as always, Black first.